The Witcher narrative director Philipp Weber has targeted Moon Studios CEO Thomas Mahler after Mahler called out cancel culture and defended gamers fighting against woke ideology. Before we get to this, I'd like to ask you, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos here at the Trent Report. Wrote this up over at thatparkplace.com. And before we get into what Philipp Weber had to say, let's go over what Thomas Mahler had to say, specifically his stance on defending gamers opposed to woke ideology and calling out German game journalist Maurice Weber, who works at German outlet GameStar. So Mahler wrote this on X on May 13th. He basically was like an open letter. He sent this email to Weber and then he published it on X as well. He says, I think it all makes sense, Maurice. This is basically a backlash against cancel culture and similar phenomena because everyone has had enough of that nonsense. I suggest you take a more nuanced view, especially since you position yourself as a journalist. Yet you often display a narrow-minded attitude and don't seem to question what's actually going on. And that is something we should expect from a journalist. Just because you personally haven't been affected by cancel culture doesn't mean there hasn't been a lot of foolishness happening, and it's still ongoing, and it's only a matter of time before it impacts you too. He then quoted Pastor Martin Niemöller, I hope I'm saying that correctly, and he said this, Mahler said this, consider this famous statement. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Instead of allowing artists to just be artists, Hollywood and most of the game developers on the West Coast have decided that it's appropriate to use films and video games as platforms to push their own political agenda. If you argue otherwise, I would expect a journalist like you to back it up with thorough research. Probably can't because that is exactly what they are doing. The evidence is overwhelming. One just needs to pick up the latest AAA title or go to the latest Hollywood box office film. Nevertheless, he went on and said, moreover, it's become the norm to point fingers at others, particularly at those who may think differently from us. Rather than allowing others to be different and listening to them regardless, we attack them outright. It's frankly reminiscent of old Nazi tactics. Anyone who doesn't conform is ridiculed, and it's suggested they be shamed, fired, and have their careers destroyed. This has been the approach over the past few years, and I know plenty of people whose careers have been devastated by trivialities and misinformation, and they continue to suffer today. You seem unaffected, and thus you refuse to consider a more open perspective. Your apparent lack of empathy in this matter is not only unhelpful, but also shows a considerable amount of ignorance. He then wrote this, allow me to also play critic for a moment. At GameStar, you do the same thing. Instead of cleaning your own house, you wield the we report and earn from our articles, but beware, those guys are the real villains narrative. Just to ensure the spotlight never falls on you, aligning yourselves just so. That's precisely why we've cut you off. We find such morally dubious practices unacceptable and refuse to support them. You lack the initiative to conduct your own journalistic investigations, as it seems too much work when the next clickbait article is due the next day. The sad thing is that young journalists like yourself never knew anything else. The more outrage you generate, the more clicks you get, and that's how you make your living at the expense of others, which apparently doesn't matter as long as you're seen as the good guys. I hope in the future you'll approach the world with more skepticism and openness and truly consider both sides instead of aligning yourself with one to amplify their propaganda. So that was his message he sent to Maurice Weber. He then shared some concluding thoughts, writing this. It is deeply, deeply important after everything that happened over the past couple of years that we always question hidden agendas, always try to be loving and show understanding, even to those we vehemently disagree with. Proper discourse is more important than ever, and journalists need to understand their responsibilities in all this and start acting like journalists again. So in response to this post, Philipp Weber, the narrative director at CD Projekt Red, working on the new Witcher saga, the Witcher saga of games the company announced. I think they're making a trilogy, and they also have a remake of the first Witcher coming out as well. So I'm not sure if he's overseeing the first one, but he is clearly working on the new saga. He also worked on Witcher 3. But he wrote this. I do remember when you were quite happy to publicly crap on us a while ago. So please make sure to apply those principles you ask of others for yourself as well. And so Mahler responded this: I always try to. Feel free to call me out whenever I'm not true to my words. And I was right in the end, wasn't I? It's commendable that you folks turn things around. And I love you folks for that. That doesn't excuse that you sold a full price game while trying to hide the fact that it was broken and untested. He's obviously referring to Cyberpunk 2077 here. And your marketing department tried their best to cover things up. That is just a shady practice and should be condemned whenever it happens. By the way, you work in the AAA industry. I think you're playing with fire by posting publicly like this. You're a cog in a machine that doesn't really care about you. So be careful. So just to provide some context here, Mahler had previously criticized CD Projekt Red and how it sold Cyberpunk 2077 back in February 2021, a couple months after it had released. He did this in a post on Reset Era. He wrote this: the product was a fraction of what the developer hyped it up to be. And on top of that, it barely even ran on consoles that it was supposed to run surprisingly well on. He later added, and yet gamers and journalists don't really seem to mind all that much. Yeah, the backlash is coming, but usually you see a ton of people then arguing that they like the game that came out of it anyway. That is so not the point. It doesn't matter if the snake oil actually tastes fine. Don't sell me on features that don't exist. Don't paint a picture that you'll not be able to deliver. Just don't effing lie to me. You're effing over gamers. You're effing over journalists that should know better. So shame on you. And you're effing over other developers. So he basically went through a list and showed how this is kind of a pattern of behavior in triple A game development, and that CD Projekt Red was kind of picking up that mantle there, and he had enough and was calling them out on it. So I found this really interesting because Mahler's criticism was indeed accurate, and Weber's comment doesn't really make any sense given the fact that they did indeed realize what they were doing was wrong and decided to change it. So I'm not really sure if that's crapping on them, as Weber said. I think that's literally him pointing out what they were doing was wrong, and they needed to change it. And CD Projekt Red did realize that and did go about changing that and trying to deliver on the promises that they had made in the marketing, which they did not deliver on when the game was first released. So I think that he doesn't really have a leg to stand on. The idea that he's calling him a hypocrite doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. But because I think that Mahler basically really did rebuke him pretty good there and pointed out that he was indeed right and that they actually did kind of seemingly hear what he was saying and what other people were saying, he wasn't a hypocrite. So he decided to change his tacks, and he took a different approach this time with the fact that Mahler had quoted Pastor Martin Niemöller, that famous quote regarding the Holocaust that I just read. But this is what we have this year. So this person here, liberally wrote this: I love Cyberpunk 2077 and defended the PC version as a day one buyer, but please, why attack Thomas here when he's completely right? Not only was the initial state of the console versions awful, what he says about cancel culture and the limiting of creative freedom cannot be denied. Come on. So obviously, liberally is pointing out that there is really no hypocrisy, and what he is saying is correct. And then Weber says this. So he's changing his tune here. It's not about not acknowledging that, which I think we started by making it right, and we have to do in the future by not repeating it. So he's acknowledging that Mahler's criticisms were indeed right, and they actually had to make it right by acknowledging that they were wrong. And then now he's saying that they are promising not to do that again in the future. But he goes on to say it's about how invoking quotes about the Holocaust while sitting in a glass house is maybe a bit much. So again, he keeps trying to paint Mahler as a hypocrite, but he's in the same sentence here. He's admitting that Mahler's criticisms were indeed right, and that CD Projekt Red admitted that they were right, and they went on to fix it and acknowledge those criticisms and respond to them by actually embracing what the criticism was. So I still don't understand why he's trying to say the glass house. Doesn't really make any sense. But again, here he is trying to now make it about his quotes about the Holocaust, saying that is too much. Mahler responded here saying, I do think it was appropriate since the more extreme folks on both sides use rhetoric that I honestly didn't think I'd see again in my lifetime. And then Weber says, I agree that it's become impossible to even have a conversation, but I feel going extreme like that, he's obviously referring to the Holocaust quote, doesn't help anything. It just makes all sides more extreme, as if there is no in between left. I 100% disagree with that assertion. Obviously, I've defended Gina Carano over the past couple of years here, and it looks like Weber is doing exactly what Lucasfilm did to Gina Carano right before or as they fired her. So remember, Gina Carano posted this screenshot here from Warrior Priest Jim podcast to her Instagram stories. It said Jews were beaten in the streets not by Nazi soldiers, but by their neighbors, even by children. Because history is edited, most people today don't realize that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first made their own neighbors hate them simply for being Jews. How is that any different from hating someone for their political views? So lots of people were taking this completely out of context, saying that Gina was comparing Republicans to Jews, etc. She's made it clear that's not what she was doing. She was basically just warning about people hating their neighbors and how that can lead to absolutely catastrophic results. And I think that's exactly what Thomas Mahler was saying here as well when he quoted the pastor there in that famous quote. And Weber is saying here that it just makes all sides more extreme. That's absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't really make any sense. You're literally warning about those extremes by using an extreme example, obviously, in the Holocaust and World War II. But so again, doesn't really make any sense. And he's doing exactly what Lucasfilm did with Gina Carano. Because if you recall, Lucasfilm fired Gina Carano after she posted this to her Instagram stories. It says Gina Carano is not currently employed by Lucasfilm, and there are no plans for her to be in the future. Nevertheless, her social media posts denigrating people based on their cultural and religious identities are abhorrent and unacceptable. So you can see how Lucasfilm kind of attempted to weaponize Gina's post warning about this evil, and then they try to paint her as evil. It's truly wild, and I think Weber was kind of doing the same thing here with Thomas Mahler. I'm not sure if he realized he was doing it or if he actually buys into this rhetoric that he's using here, that it makes both sides extreme, like warning about extremes and saying that that's a bad thing somehow makes other people extreme. I don't know if he just doesn't understand what Thomas Mahler was doing. Who knows, like what's going on? But clearly, what he's saying doesn't really make a lot of sense at all. And for someone who's a narrative director, you think they'd be able to at least try and cobble together a narrative, right? Um, Nevertheless, though, Weber would also bemoan the fact that Mark Kern shared his criticism of Mahler and questioned this. Why do these AAA game devs always attack truth and people who stand against cancel culture? I obviously shared a couple of screenshots of Weber, what he had to say to Thomas Mahler. And then Weber did respond. Obviously, it's a little bit deeper in the thread here. So we have this person, Ginger Prime, saying, Thomas is the man, and he said a very well worded thing, and they're trying to gaslight him now because of it. I hope he doesn't waste his time too much today because of these people who try and overwhelm you with their BS. And I think that could be an accurate assessment of what Philipp Weber is doing. He is trying to gaslight there, and by saying like, "Oh, you aren't really warning about extremism; you're actually inflaming extremism." Right? It just really doesn't, like I said, doesn't make any sense. But anyways, Thomas Mahler responded to him and says, "Focus is always on Wicked first. He is the CEO of Moon Studios. They are working on a game called No Rest for the Wicked." So that is what he is responding to there. It is currently available in Steam Early Access as they are continuing to work on it. But Weber responded to this saying, "Hey, you're arguing against cancel culture. But when I replied directly that I found that argument hypocritical, which I think is an okay thing to do, the tweet is taken to now be an overall woke agenda and sent to 100,000 plus followers. Don't you think that sounds familiar?" Well, no, it doesn't sound familiar. I understand what you're trying to do here. You're literally trying to paint people like Mahler and Grums as trying to cancel you, when what we're doing is, or what I think they're doing, is they're pointing out your argument is the one that's hypocritical, makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And I think I've explained that pretty well so far. So again, going back to the three rules of social justice warriors as posited by Vox Day, what do? They lie, they double down on their lies, and then they project. So this guy is literally trying to accuse Mahler and Grums of doing what he is doing. he's out here trying to uh, call out Thomas Mahler, and now he's accusing Mahler of engaging in cancel culture when he's the one who initially started it, right? You really can't make this stuff up. These people always kind of follow these same patterns, and it's just truly wild how quickly they do it, right? I mean, once you see these patterns, once you understand these laws of the social justice warrior, it's very easy to identify how they operate. And this guy completely uh, falls in line of all of those three laws of the social justice warrior. As for why Weber decided to take issue with Mahler, aside from the fact that he's probably is indeed ideologically aligned with social justice warriors, as we've kind of pointed out here, Kern speculated this in case you're wondering why Philipp Weber, narrative director of CD Projekt Red's Witcher and Cyberpunk, is attacking Thomas Mahler for speaking out. CD Projekt Red has become woke and is pandering to ESG investors see their own video. So let's take a listen to this video. I actually have not watched this yet, but let's take a listen.
My name is Piotr Nierubowicz. I'm a member of the board and CFO at CDPR. I'm also personally involved in a range of environmental, social, and governance initiatives, ESG for short, and I'm responsible for CDPR Group's reporting in this matter. I would like to present our strategic approach.
So there we go. Obviously saying that they are totally on board with ESG 20 seconds into the video. I don't think we need to really watch any more of that. But that is exactly what he said. That is his job, is to pander to ESG investors. So I think that also makes a lot of sense as to why Weber is going after Thomas Mahler here. And I think that does not bode well for The Witcher moving forward. Obviously, I think I think CD Projekt Red lost a lot of goodwill with Cyberpunk 2077, and clearly this is not going to gain them any either, especially when they had such a wild success with The Witcher 3. And I really thought they had really great customer service. You get these really great messages within the CD case and everything, talking about how they really appreciate you as a customer that you purchase their game. They're basically doing the Tom Cruise message in front of the movies before Tom Cruise did it. They just did it with the discs for their games. But just wanted to kind of talk about this, point this out. This definitely turns me off from CD Projekt Red moving forward. I will definitely be more highly skeptical of the games that they are putting out there. Clearly, they are embracing woke ideology. They're pandering to ESG investors, and now they're targeting their executive team is targeting other developers that are calling this stuff out and calling it for what it is, showing that it is wrong. And you, you just can't really support people that do that when they're obviously standing opposed to the truth. But let me know what you guys make of this. Let me know what you make of Philipp Weber, his actions here against Thomas Mahler. Let me know in the comments below. Do you agree with him? Do you even understand what he's trying to do? Do you disagree with him? Let me know, like I said, in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable to each other, but to always speak the truth.